Hi, and welcome to our lesson on if-else statements, or making decisions in C. Computers have the ability to make simple true-false decisions. Based on the result of the decision, the program will follow one path or another. We sometimes call these a branch statements because it can branch out in more than one direction, or a conditional statement because it does one thing or another based on a certain condition. I remember baseball legend Yogi Berra, who once said, "When you get to the fork in the road, take it." Yogi was a great baseball player, but he'd make a lousy programmer. In programming, we have to be a little bit more specific than that. So what a decision is it's a statement that allows us to choose one path or another based on a certain condition. So what kind of information do we need to give a decision statement? Well, first we have to tell it what condition is being tested. So in our thermostat example, we might ask, is actual temperature less than desired temperature? Okay, then we have to say, here's where when you get to the fork in the road, take it, we actually have to be more specific. So what do you do if the condition is true, and what do you do if the condition is false? So in this case, if the condition is true, actual temperature is less than desired temperature, then we want to turn the furnace on. And if the condition is false, then we want to turn the furnace off. So if you're familiar with flowcharts, a flowchart is kind of a graphical way of showing the flow of a program. We get to our conditional statement here and we say, is actual temperature less than desired temperature? If the answer is yes, then we follow this path, turn the furnace on, and we end up down here. If the answer is no, we follow this path, turn the furnace off. Either way, we end up down here, and in no circumstance do we do both of these things. We do one or the other, never both. Okay, and we always end up at the same point. Okay, here's how that decision looks in C. We start out with an if statement. Then we have a condition, always put in parentheses. Okay, so if actual temperature is less than desired temperature, just like here, is actual temperature less than desired temperature? Okay, if it is, then we do this. This is what we call the true clause, or the yes clause. So if the answer to that is yes, we're going to do this. So furnace control relay gets the value on. Okay, if that condition is false, we skip over the yes clause, or the true clause, and we go down to the else clause. Okay, so if the condition is true, actual temperature is less than desired temperature, it's going to do this, and it's going to skip the else. So it'll do this, jump right down here, and resume down at the bottom. If this condition is false, it skips this, does the else clause, and then still ends up at the bottom. Okay, the basic structure of an if-else statement is we have the word if, followed by a condition. We have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And in between those two curly braces, we have all the things we're going to do if the condition is true. Okay? Now you'll notice that I have these indented. C doesn't require that I indent these, but it makes for a nice visual separator. It says these things all go together. What C wants to know is it uses the curly braces to indicate that. Okay? We use indentation as human beings because it helps us visualize this is a block of statements that all goes together. Okay, C uses the curly braces to say these things go together. We use the indentation. We're going to use both. We have to use the braces, and it's much more readable to use indentation. Okay, the computer doesn't care whether you indent, but the programmer cares, and so does the professor. Okay, so here's our if, our condition, curly braces with all the statements that you do if the condition is true. Then followed by the word else. Okay, nothing in between. Once you have that closing curly brace, the next thing has to be the word else. Okay, then an opening brace, a couple of statements, however many statements you need, and a closing curly brace. Okay, the braces line up. For every opening brace, you have a closing brace, just like parentheses in math. Okay, and then your statements here inside always end with a semicolon. Okay, if you're going to write an if-else statement, the first thing you want to do is make the structure. Okay, given that we're typing things into a computer, and the nice thing about a computer is I can type this, and then I can stick my cursor in here and fill in the blanks. So the easiest thing to do is write your structure first. So write if, put your parentheses, opening and closing curly brace, write else, opening and closing brace, then you fill in the blanks. Okay, so make the structure, fill in the blanks. Make the structure, fill in the blanks. Okay, now where do you put the semicolons? You'll notice that in a C program some lines end with a semicolon, some lines don't end with a semicolon. A semicolon is kind of like the period at the end of a sentence. It says this is the end of this statement. Okay, now the line if with a condition in parentheses, this isn't the end of a statement, so we do not put a semicolon here. Okay, this is a statement within the if clause, the true clause, so we do put a semicolon there. We do put a semicolon here because this is a statement of its own. That's a statement of its own, so we put semicolons there. When in doubt, look for examples, and I prefer it if you look at examples that I have given you, because some people, there are a lot of ways to do shortcuts in C, and sometimes you will see a semicolon here, but it's not followed by anything else. And for now, I just want you to follow my examples and not take any shortcuts, okay? Notice that there are no conditions on the line that says else. Okay, it really doesn't make any sense to put a condition there. The condition that gets you here is that this condition was false. So you never put a condition on the else statement. You can put a comment here saying, well, this is why I got here, but you never put a condition in parentheses on an else line. Okay, the other thing is that the word else, the whole else clause, is optional. I can say, if this condition is true, do these two things. If the condition is not true, just skip it. Don't do those two things. Okay, I don't have to do something else. So I don't have to have an else with my if. Okay, you can't, however, have an else without an if. That doesn't make sense, right? What does the else mean? Else what? You know, what if I came up to you and said, otherwise you'll fail the class? You'd say, well, otherwise, what's the other part of that? Okay, so you can't have an else without an if, but you can have an if without an else. So if the condition is true, do this. Otherwise, just don't do it. So that concludes our little lesson on making decisions, and the next thing we're going to talk about in here is how to make a program repeat a process over and over again, because we're going to find in microcontrollers they're very good at repetitive processes, and we quite often have to repeat certain statements under various conditions. So we'll talk about how to repeat things in our next lesson. See you next time.